Welcome back to the channel. Today's build is going to be on the Path of the Burning Steps. These Titan exotic legs state that solar final blows periodically grant you an escalating bonus to your weapon damage. You're also harder to slow or freeze with stasis, and when you break out, you take no damage, and create a burst of solar energy around yourself. Here's a quick breakdown of Path of the Burning Steps. It has the perk Firewalker. Solar kills have a chance of granting 1 stack of Firewalker. Firewalker increases weapon damage. In PvE, 1 stack is 20% weapon increase. 2 stacks is 25% weapon damage increase, 3 stacks is 35%, and 4 stacks is 40%. So the way that this works is that every 1 to 3 kills, basically an average of 2 kills, will give you that 1 stack of Firewalker for 10 seconds. And we can stack that up to 4 stacks to get that 40% PvE bonus damage increase. So next we're going to be pairing this with our Firebolt grenade, which is very important for this build because of the artifact. So let's take a look what Firebolt states here. A Firebolt grenade is a grenade that unleashes bolts of damaging solar light at nearby targets and slightly scorches them. So the Firebolt grenade is going to go out and it's going to seek targets. It most likely usually hits about 2 targets at once from what I can see. Sometimes I think it can hit up to 4 targets. I'm not certain on that, but basically what it's going to do is it's going to allow itself to kind of seek out the targets and scorch those targets while also dealing some damage to those targets. And as I said before, this is really important because it pairs so well with the artifact. So let's go into looking at the artifact and how we're going to soup up this Firebolt grenade to make it the most potent that it can possibly be. Let's quickly go over here what I have on the artifact. I've just taken some standard anti-champion mods here. Pulse rifle, barrier sidearm, I like overload bow, and then I have unstoppable scout rifle. Pretty basic stuff there in the first column. The next important thing, since we're on a solar subclass, is authorized mod solar, or we're going to get a reduction in the cost of solar mod. That's going to be important in the build, as well as authorized mods grenades. So any mods that are affecting our grenades are also going to be reduced in cost for the energy on our armor. But the next most important one that we're also going to have here on the build is going to be Solar Surge, where when we collect a fire sprite, it's going to give us an armor charge, which is very, very important. And then we also have Flare Up. So Firebolt grenades are going to be able to apply more Scorch stacks to targets, which is also very important in this build because we're going to be working with Scorch to create ignitions, and we're going to be generating some fire sprites and then getting charged with light from that. And when we have a Firebolt grenade equipped, we will also get a second Firebolt grenade by having the Rain of Firebolts artifact mod. Our first aspect of the build is Soul Invictus. Let's break down what Soul Invictus does here. Soul Invictus states that solar ability Final Blows, Hammer of Soul impacts, and defeating scorched targets creates sunspots. Your abilities regenerate faster, and your super drains more slowly while standing in a sunspot. Sunspots apply Scorch and deal damage to targets inside. Entering a sunspot applies Restoration to you. Soul Invictus pairs well with Path of the Burning Steps because when we defeat targets with our abilities, it will activate our Firewalker buff. That Firewalker buff affects our weapon damage, and Soul Invictus affects our abilities in 2 ways. 1, when we step into a sunspot, we'll get increased ability regeneration, and 2, because they apply extra Scorch. That extra Scorch from a sunspot can help synergize with our artifact perks, which are buffing our Firebolt grenades, Scorch stacks to help us potentially create an ignition. If we do get an ignition or even just a kill from a sunspot, that allows us to keep the Firewalker buff active. Our second aspect of the build is Roaring Flames. Final blows with solar abilities or ignitions increase the damage of your solar abilities, and this can stack up to 3 times. So because our goal is to keep Firewalker active as much as possible, having Roaring Flames in the build is very important because final blows with your solar abilities or ignitions will increase the damage of your solar abilities. So we're going to be buffing our own grenades with the Roaring Flames aspect, so we're guaranteed to get more kills with it, which is then in turn going to guarantee that we're able to keep Firewalker active more often with this build. So now that we have both of our aspects chosen, let's take a look at the fragments that we're going to use next to take the build to a whole nother level. This build's fragments capitalizes on Ashes, Searing, Blistering, and Wonder. Our first fragment of the build is Ember of Ashes. With this fragment, we're going to double up on how many Scorch stacks we're applying. Essentially, all this is doing is applying 50% more Scorch when we apply any source of Scorch. So all Scorch stacks applied are going to be increased by 50%. That means our Firebolt grenades, that means our sunspots as well. So that's really going to help out this build because our goal is to create ignitions. So as I show on screen, Flare Up plus Ashes will create 60 Scorch stacks from just 1 grenade. If we can throw 2 grenades, we'll create an ignition. This also buffs the Incandescent perk. Our second fragment of the build is going to be Ember of Searing. Ember of Searing states that defeating scorched targets will grant you melee energy, and it also creates a fire sprite. So this fragment functions based on the enemy that you're going to defeat. A tier 1 enemy will give you 8%, tier 2 is going to be 15, tier 3 17.5, and tier 4 25% melee energy. And keep in mind now and in future seasons, this will not only give you grenade energy when you're picking up a fire sprite from this aspect, but you're also going to get an armor charge this season and in future seasons. It's also important to note that a fire sprite will give you 12.5% of your grenade energy. And now on to our third fragment, Ember of Blistering. Defeating targets with Solar Ignition grants grenade energy. And very akin to the other fragment that we looked at, this is based on enemy rank, with grenade energy being 8% from a tier 1 enemy, 12.25% from tier 2, 16.5% from tier 3, and tier 4 being 25%. And our fourth and final fragment of the build is Ember of Wonder. Solar Ignition multi-kills generate an orb of power. Now this fragment does have a 10-second cooldown before another ignition multi-kill can generate an orb, but because we're pairing this with things like Reaper and Firepower, this is a great way to keep orbs in the build flowing and allow us to keep our solar weapon surges active. If we use Reaper and Firepower as well as Wonder, we're going to capitalize on our orb generation. Next thing that we want to look at is the stat priorities in the build. We're going to look at Resilience as max tier 10, 100 resilience, because that's easy 30% damage resistance. Resilience is also tied to your barricade cooldown, so that's going to help us function by feeding our abilities and especially generating orbs with the mod Reaper. Discipline is also very important because it ensures in higher end content that we're going to be able to ignite targets. Remember, Soul Invictus and Roaring Flames are going to stack our ability damage up, and that's going to help us keep Firewalker active. Next, let's take a look at a full overview of aspects, fragments, and mods all together here. I'm on the Sunbreaker Solar subclass. I'm running Hammer of Soul. You could run the big hammer as well if you want to. Burning Maul, that's fine. I prefer Rally Barricade because it has a shorter cooldown. Strafe Lift is my preference. We're going to stick with the Throwing Hammer, and then we have the Firebolt Grenade. Those are the fragments that we had mentioned and just gone over. Then we're going to take a quick glance at all of the armor mods next. You'll see these here just as a brief overview for anybody who wants to stop here on the build video and just kind of jot down what we have here and start building already. In the next section, I'll break down in detail each piece, but this is just a quick overview. As I mentioned, you can kind of get an idea of how the build is going to function and how we're going to generate some orbs, what mods we're going to use to help regenerate some ability energy as well, time dilation, solar surges to help stack on top of Firewalker, because yes, they do stack. And I'll demonstrate that here in a little bit. And here's our final piece, the chest armor. Now I want to take a look at the detailed view of our helmet armor mods. We're going to be running one copy of Ashes to Assets. That's going to give us 4.8% super energy on grenade kills. We do have 2 of those grenades, so that's going to help out really great. One copy of Harmonic Siphon to generate an orb of power on a solar multi-kill, and then one copy of Heavy Ammo Finder. Next, we're going to take a look at our arm mods. On our arm, we have one copy of Firepower, where grenade kills will spawn an orb of power, one copy of Impact Induction, which will provide 20% of our grenade energy on a melee attack, and one copy of Grenade Kickstart to provide us additional grenade energy when we do throw a grenade. Our third piece of armor, our chest, we're going to have one copy of Concussive Dampener to reduce AoE damage in PvE by 15%, one copy of Solar Damage Resistance, 15% reduction in solar damage taken, and one copy of Charged Up to allow us to have an additional armor charge. On our legs, we're going to have one copy of Innervation, which is going to reduce our grenade cooldown by 10% anytime we pick up an orb of power, one copy of Solar Surge, and an additional copy of Solar Surge, allowing us to have a 17% damage bonus to our solar weapons, and yes, this does stack with Firewalker. And last but not least, let's take a look at our mark and see what we have here. On our mark, we are running one copy of Time Dilation. That's going to increase the decaying armor charges we have by 5 seconds. One copy of Bomber, which is going to provide us some additional grenade energy when we use our class ability. And then we have one copy of Reaper, where after activating that class ability, our next weapon kill is going to generate an orb of power. Next up is a new section that I've been providing in my build guide videos. It's going to be the weapon loadouts for dual champion types of a enemy combatant species. We're going to be going over Cabal and Hive. For Cabal and Hive, this is a recommended loadout that I would be going with. Something similar to this if you have weapons that are similar. Cabal and Hive are Barrier and Unstoppable. So these are the weapons that I'm choosing if I'm going into a Grandmaster or Master activity that's going to have those two champion types. The next dual champion combatant type is going to be Taken as well as Scorn. So because once again we have unstoppables as well as overloads, what we're going to be doing here is using the Riptide with Chill Clip for the unstoppables, and then we're going to be using something like Tiku's Divination, which can stack its own damage benefit on top of the Solar Surges as well as Firewalker to really juice out our damage here when we're talking about solar weapon damage. So this is the type of loadout that I would be using, something like a linear that has good ammo economy as well. The last combo champion combatant types are going to be Vex and Fallen. So for Vex and Fallen, we're going to have to deal with barriers. That's why I'm going with something like Arbalest. That's going to help take care of the anti-barrier champions quite easily. And then I'm using the Strident Whistle because it can roll also Incandescent and Explosive Head. So that's really great because those are going to help juice our ignition damage that we're going to get. Once again, going with the linear for the ammo economy. So there's some controversy about Firewalker getting a nerf next season and not being able to stack with the Solar Surges. And if that does happen, that is fine. That is also one of the reasons why I'm running a copy of Grenade Kickstart, because I'm kind of future-proofing this build. Another issue that comes up often is why run one copy of Grenade Kickstart when it's going to reduce your armor charges, which is going to eliminate your Solar Surges? Well, not only are we going to have our Firewalker buff active, which is going to replicate the same thing that Solar Surges do without having to pick up an Orb of Power, just get the solar weapon or ability kills, but because we're able to generate those so often with fire sprites. Fire sprites are here in the game and they're going to stay around with the implementation of them being added into the season of the deep. So you'll see here, I've got the armor charges back. I spend them, I get them right back. It's no problem. Just know how to manage your ability loop and you'll be fine. And next up, we'll just take a look at some Firewalker damage stacking. Okay, so this is us unequipping Solar Surges, and we're going to test a combination of Firewalker as well as Radiant and see what we can get here. So we just hit for 7,447 with Radiant active. I see 8,042 and then 8,340. So let's test this out. 8,340, no Solar Surges. We throw the hammer to get Radiant and still 8,340. So that's the reason that we don't run the Radiant Fragment within this build. So now if you take a look, I've got a decaying armor charge, which means I'm running my 2 copies of Solar Surge. And let's take a look at the damage numbers that I'm getting here. 9,000. So that's higher than the 8,340. So that is proving that the Solar Surges are indeed stacking with Path of the Burning Steps Firewalker buff. That is very important because that is allowing us to surpass the Firewalker damage buff of 40% and gaining an additional 17% damage, which could potentially be 22% if you do run a triple Solar Surge in your build. I hope this information has been helpful. And once again, let me know how you like this build. Appreciate you all liking and subscribing to the channel. Thank you for your viewership, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.